Okay, so you've probably never heard of a company called SitusAMC. I hadn't either. But a quiet data breach at their offices, it could actually affect you directly, especially if you're a customer of some of the world's biggest banks. So let's dig in and uncover how this whole hidden breach happened and what it really means for your personal data. This whole story, it really starts with a single number, 8. That's how many lawsuits suddenly slammed into SitusAMC after a data security incident. We're talking 8 separate complaints, but they were all telling the exact same, really troubling story. The allegations were so similar, almost identical, that a judge decided to take a pretty big step, merging all 8 lawsuits. So this wasn't just a bunch of related complaints anymore. It just became one single massive class action lawsuit. Right, so this consolidation, it was ordered by a federal judge in New York's Southern District. And the goal? Well, it was to try and streamline what was very quickly turning into a huge legal battle. The court's reasoning was pretty straightforward. They talked about judicial efficiency and avoiding inconsistent rulings. To put it simply, the legal system basically said, hey, one single event is affecting all these people in the same way, so it makes sense to handle it as one single case.
So this brings us to the big question, right? Who on earth is SitusAMC? And how does a data breach at their company end up sparking lawsuits from customers of the world's largest banks?
SitusAMC is what you'd call a business-to-business company. You don't know their name because their clients are the businesses you do know, those massive financial institutions. They're the ones operating in the background, handling all these critical behind-the-scenes services for the mortgage industry. To really get the connection here, we've got to follow the data. And it all starts with you, the customer. It starts the moment you apply for a mortgage or even just do your daily business with your bank. So you hand over your most sensitive financial information to your bank, a name you know, like JP Chase, Citi, or Morgan Stanley, and you trust that they're keeping it safe. But here's the part you never see. This is the critical handoff. Your bank then passes your data along to a third-party partner like SitusAMC to manage all those backstage services. And just like that, poof, your private info is now in the hands of a company you've probably never even heard of. Okay, so now that we see how you're connected to this company, let's rewind and look at the breach itself. How did this whole thing go down? This timeline just shows how fast everything spiraled. On November 12th, the company realizes there's a problem. 10 days later, they release a public statement. And then just 2 days after that, the first lawsuit hits. The whole situation just escalated incredibly quickly. In their own statement, the company confirmed that internal stuff, like accounting records and legal agreements, were compromised. But here's the part that should really get your attention. The breach also potentially exposed data belonging to its clients' customers. In other words, people like you. So let's shift gears now and see how this corporate incident became a very real story about actual people and their private information. The lead plaintiff for this new consolidated case is a man named Armen Kalichian. Now, he's not a customer of SitusAMC. He's a customer of JP Chase. He is the perfect human face for that whole data chain we just traced. This quote from the complaint, this gets right to the heart of the whole argument. Kalichian's lawsuit basically claims the breach wasn't just some random bit of bad luck. No, it was the direct result of negligent and/or careless acts by the very company that was supposed to be protecting all this data. And this is where the two sides of the story really split. The lawsuit alleges the company failed to protect unencrypted data, but the company's response is very, very specific. They say no encrypting malware was involved. But notice what they're not saying. They never actually address whether the data that got stolen was encrypted in the first place, and that is a huge omission. And here we have the official corporate response. It's so carefully worded, right? It's all focused on their direct clients, the banks. They're reviewing the data, working with partners. It's classic crisis management 101. So, where does all this stand today? Let's take a look at what happens next in this story. Well, right now, those 8 separate lawsuits are officially moving forward as one powerful, unified class action case. And at the same time, SitusAMC and its cybersecurity advisors are still deep in an investigation, trying to figure out the full scope of what actually happened. So what are the big lessons here? First, your data's journey is way longer and more complicated than you probably think. Second, a breach at a company you've never even heard of can still hit you and hit you hard. And finally, the legal fights that follow these breaches, they are incredibly complex and can drag on for years. This whole story really leaves us with one massive critical question. When you trust a company with your data, and then they hand it off to someone else, someone you don't even know exists, who is ultimately responsible for keeping it safe? It's something to think about.